Okay, folks, welcome to another, what was once called Bird of the Month, but we're now calling Wings of Kentucky. We even have a fancy little logo here in the upper left, pretty exciting. And today we're going to be talking about early spring migratory birds that we see here in Kentucky. I had the pleasure of visiting University of Kentucky's Robinson Forest today, and there's actually a ton more migrants than we're discussing today. But we're going to talk about some of the earliest spring migrants that we tend to see here in Kentucky, such as the one shown here. This is the brown thrasher, but we will get to that. Okay, so, and I can't tell if this label is in the way. I'll try and keep it out of the way. This is my first time doing this with Zoom. The first one we're going to talk about is one of the earliest to come back, and that's the common grackle. So the common grackle is this bird that we have here. It's a member of the family Icteridae. It's the blackbird family, so this is a member of the blackbird family. And males and females can sometimes be difficult to tell apart. This is here probably more like a female. This one's probably more like a male. There's some overlap between what males and females look like. In general, males are more colorful. They have a lot more iridescence to them. The tails are larger and more vaulted. So the tail feathers in the middle of the tail are actually angled downward. So if you were to look at the tail, directly from behind, it would be V-shaped. So this is a common grackle, really cool bird, really large bill, bright, kind of creamy white iris. They're a very large blackbird. Some male grackles will almost look more like a crow. They're really an impressive bird, totally native. They can be kind of a nuisance at bird feeders because they're so big. They'll bully other birds away from the bird feed. Some people may not particularly like that. I think they're very beautiful. I also think their sound is kind of beautiful, but I suspect I'm probably somewhat alone in that opinion. I'll play the songs of the common grackle for you now. This is what the actual song produced by a male to attract a mate sounds like. Certainly not the prettiest song of our songbirds. So with grackles, which are a blackbird, we tend to get other species of icterids, such as the Redwing Blackbird, which is of course in that same family. The male is, some birds have horrible names, but the male Redwing Blackbird, I think, is an aptly named bird. It is a black bird with a basically red wing. This little yellow stripe is variable. Some birds have almost like bright yellow. Some birds it'll be white. Some birds it'll be mostly absent, just a big red patch. That's a bit variable. The female, on the other hand, tends to look almost more like a sparrow. She's brown and streaky and drab. Some females have like a hint of a red wing, but not always. But they have this really acutely tipped, sharp bill, both the male and the female. Redwing Blackbird songs, keeping with the blackbird sort of theme, they're not known for being very beautiful songsters, but they do a very distinct song. The Redwing Blackbird song, I learned it as either Conqueree or Herbal Tea. So this is the song of the Redwing Blackbird. And there's a quiet dickcissel singing in there, so disregard that and just listen to the Conqueree. Okay, so there's our Redwing Blackbird. So they tend to show up pretty early, and there are places in Kentucky where you can see Redwing Blackbirds all year round. So if you're one of those people, you're like, hey, I don't see this, this isn't a spring migrant, I see them in the winter too. Know that that is true in certain parts of Kentucky. Along with grackles and redwing blackbirds, we have the third blackbird species we're going to talk about today, and that's the brown-headed cowbird. And the brown-headed cowbird is an interesting blackbird. It's smaller than the other two. And we've got our male here on the left, kind of has that iridescent plumage to the body. And then it's also aptly named. It has this sort of matte brown head. The female, on the other hand, is pretty much entirely drab brown. And actually, the extreme drabness that she has, no wing bars, no streaks, no spots, nothing, that actually is one of the more helpful ways to identify a female cowbird. They're a cool bird for a bunch of reasons. Again, early spring migrant, and there are parts of Kentucky where they are found even in the winter time. But they're what we call a brood parasite. So it's technically native to Kentucky. Probably didn't used to be historically very abundant, but due to widespread intensive agriculture and clearing of forest, which has created a landscape that cowbirds like a bit more than they historically would have, their populations have increased substantially here. And because it's a brood parasite, the female cowbird lays her egg in the nest of another bird, and that other bird raises a baby cowbird alongside its own babies. And they can have a serious effect on some bird populations. Other bird populations don't seem to be terribly bothered by the cowbird. But it's important to keep in mind that it is a native bird, and it has evolved this really interesting life history to survive. Their song is possibly less impressive than the grackle. The male sings a very short song that sounds like a glee or a gurgle glee. There's not a whole lot to it, but it is distinctive, that kind of gurgly, liquidy note followed by the rising Z. Okay, next up, one of my favorites is the Eastern Phoebe, and this is a very early spring migrant in a lot of parts of Kentucky. They start singing in February, or even occasionally even sooner in certain areas. So it's a really cool bird. It's a member of the flycatcher family. Is a relatively small flycatcher by flycatcher standards. It's not a particularly beautiful bird. I mean, I like them, of course, but I'm an ornithologist, so I'm a little biased. They have these kind of pale, sort of really vague wing bars that don't really stand out. The head, it doesn't have an eye ring. It doesn't have any super distinctive markings. The breast is just plain. The things that I look for with a Phoebe are, it's got a very dark head, so it's very dark, especially toward the crown. Some birds almost look black up here. And then when you see the breast, it's kind of like this sort of cream with like a sulfury wash to it. But otherwise, it doesn't have a lot of like really interesting plumage characteristics. What it lacks in beautiful plumage, however, it makes up for in the lovely song. Lovely because it's both pleasing to the ear and because it says its name, or it was probably named because of the way its song sounds like it's saying Phoebe, Phoebe, and it does that over and over and over. It can be a little incessant, but I really like the song of the Eastern Phoebe. All right. Next up, one of our early spring migrants is the chipping sparrow. I tend to start seeing these in most parts of Kentucky sometime around March. And so they've been here for a little while now. It's a very distinctive little bird. Now, sparrows are tricky for a lot of folks because they're kind of drab, but the chipping sparrow is relatively easy, I would say. So it's a small sparrow. They're kind of squat by sparrow standards. They spend a lot of time on the ground and then they squish down even more. But things to look for, we've got two white wing bars here on the secondary coverts, kind of this drab, sort of like streaky mantle that many sparrows have. But then turn your attention to the face and the breast. So the breast is basically kind of gray or white and pretty plain. The throat is very pale and plain. The head is mostly gray and unmarked with the exception of this like dark eye line and a reddish brown cap, and this little black bill, white eye stripe, also called a supercilium. And these set of characteristics, especially this bright red cap, tell you that you've got a chipping sparrow. Now, the chipping sparrow's song is a rapid, relatively dry trill, like a really rapid sewing machine or something like that. So this is that trill of that chipping sparrow. You will hear these guys all summer long in your neighborhood. So be on the lookout and to listen out for chipping sparrows this spring. Next is one of my favorites, the white-throated sparrow. Again, sparrows can be really tough, but my God, this is a beautiful striking bird. Look at this thing. I mean, it's got kind of the standard sparrow phenotype to the back. It's a little bit darker than the chipping sparrow on the undersides, but it's not streaked like a song sparrow would be. But let's look at that head. Just beautiful bird. It's got that white throat where it gets its name from. Gray auriculars. It's got this very dark, basically black eye line, almost a black cap with a white stripe down the middle. And probably my favorite part, white supercilium with this little blaze of yellow. Just a really beautiful bird. Now, I have asterisks here because it's a spring migrant, so to speak. However, it is really more of a, they spend the winter here. So they've been here all winter, but they're starting to sing this time of year, and they have a very lovely song. It's a nice clear whistle. Some say it sounds like Poor Sam Peabody, 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 or Oh Sweet Canada, 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 which is where many of them breed. But a very lovely song, the white-throated sparrow. It's hard not to love that. Let's listen one more time. Okay. Next up, we have the Eastern Towhee. Now, I guess I'm keeping with the sparrow theme. The Eastern Towhee doesn't look like a sparrow, but it actually is. And I have the asterisks again because they also really commonly overwinter in Kentucky. You're getting to sense a theme here. A lot of these early spring migrants, many of them actually are here in the winter. And the reason they are also early spring migrants is because most of them are wintering, the ones that are returning in the spring. They probably are short distance migrants, so they're not going very far. And that's the truth with the Eastern Towhee as well. We've got the male here on the left, which has this black kind of hood, black back, and black tail with, it's a little hard to see in this image, but it has white edges on the tail, and it has some white markings on the primaries and occasionally on the tertials. Also very distinctive is this bright rufous patch on both the male and the female. The female basically looks like the male, but everywhere where he's black, she's brown. It used to be called the rufous-sided towhee, which is where it got that name from this rufous patch here on the side. But it doesn't look like a sparrow in terms of color, but it morphologically does have that kind of very long-legged look. They're very comfortable on the ground. They have a very fun song too. It's a very nice, a very loud, drink your tea. So to be clear, we do have towhees all winter long in parts of Kentucky, but as spring continues to advance, many of these towhees are migrating north from places like the southern United States, and we are going to be quickly overburdened with lots of eastern towhees. So we'll enjoy them while they're here in their high numbers. Next, we have our brown thrasher from the title slide. So this is a cool bird. They come back very early, usually February or March. Really striking bird. Look at this very long bill. Kind of reminds me almost of a road runner or something. Really long tail, relatively short little wings. Bright yellow eye, very striking. It's kind of this brown and like white color scheme. Brown on the back. We've got white wing bars here, light underneath, and then these streaky spots down the breast. Relatively long legs. It's in the family Mimidae. So as you might expect, Mimidae is a family of birds that are famous for mimicking the sounds of other birds, and the brown thrasher is no exception. They are one of the first migrant mimids that we receive, and we're going to talk about two other mimids, or mimics, if you will, but birds in the family Mimidae. We're going to talk about two more. But the brown thrasher is a bird that repeats the songs of other birds, and it basically will say, all right, I like this bird, I'm going to steal that song, and then I like this other bird, I'm going to steal its song, and this other one, and steal its song, and they'll steal other wildlife sounds or any sounds they hear, like they may incorporate frog calls into their repertoire. But what they'll do is they'll string together a whole series of mimicked phrases into one long song. And here's the key with the brown thrasher. The brown thrasher obsessively strings together every note 2 times in a row. So it'll do 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, and string all of those notes together like that. So let's listen to an example. So let's listen one more time. And when we're listening to the brown thrasher, we're listening for paired repeated notes. Okay, so I would be remiss if I didn't at least talk about the other two mimids. The next up is the northern mockingbird. Now I have our asterisks again. They're actually not really particularly migratory, at least to my knowledge. In Kentucky, they are a year-round resident. They're here in the winter and everything. But, you know, it's worth throwing them in here because, well, for comparison, really, with the other two mimids. We've talked about the northern mockingbird on Wings of Kentucky before, but it's this kind of medium gray overall. The tail and the wings are a darker gray, white wing bars, paler below, and when you see the wings open, it's got big white patches on the wings that are very distinctive. The thing about the mockingbird song, unlike the brown thrasher, remember the thrasher repeats everything twice. The mockingbird repeats everything 3 or more times. So let's listen to that northern mockingbird. Try that again. Here we go. Okay, now our last mimid we're going to talk about is the gray catbird. So the gray catbird, it doesn't arrive as early as the brown thrasher does, but a little bit later. And I see there was a record today here in Jacobson Park here in central Lexington. And gray catbirds are a cool bird. They're a mimid, like I said, easy to identify. It's overall this like relatively dark gray bird, darker gray on the tail, black cap, and these rusty sort of chestnut colored undertail coverts. Now the catbird gets its name because it produces a call that sounds a bit like a cat meowing, or actually can sound pretty convincingly like a cat meowing. But it's a mimid, so that its true song is actually repeating notes from other birds. Remember, the brown thrasher repeats everything twice. The mockingbird repeats everything 3 times. The catbird repeats everything once. So let's have a listen. Okay. Next up, the killdeer. So the killdeer is a really cool bird. And again, a lot of these birds you can sort of find during mild winter and in southern Kentucky and areas at low elevation. You can find some of these birds in the winter, but we really get the majority of our killdeer in the springtime, and they're an early spring migrant bird. And you can see it looks quite different than the other birds we've looked at today, and that's because we've mostly been looking at songbirds or passerines. The killdeer is actually a species of shorebird, just like the woodcock, which we talked about during the March Wings of Kentucky. And the killdeer is another shorebird, and unlike most shorebirds, it does not nest near, or sorry, yes, unlike most shorebirds, it does not nest near the shore, which is similar to what the woodcock does. But unlike the woodcock, it also doesn't really nest much in early successional forest. In fact, killdeer are really at home in parking lots and urban areas, very unusual by shorebird standards. Really easy to ID. Notice these long legs here. It's got this kind of brown back, mostly brown head, bright white underparts. It's got these little white and black markings on the face. Very distinctively, though, are 2 bands across the breast. Very distinctive. Now, a lot of people ask, what the heck, killdeer, what kind of name is that? Well, it gets its name from its call, which sounds like it's saying, kill deer, kill deer. You may have to use your imagination a little bit with that one. Okay, we've only got a few more. Another one here, the black-throated green warbler, is a species you're much more likely to hear than you are to see. It's a very small bird, beautiful, and relatively aptly named, I would say. It's got this kind of greenish back, this black throat with streaks down the flank. Excuse me, lovely bird. And they're singing all over in Lexington and various parts of Kentucky right now. If you go out to a wooded area today or tomorrow, you should hear black-throated green warblers singing. And they have a very distinctive song. It's a high-pitched and buzzy trill that sounds like they're saying, trees, trees, I love trees. Trees, trees, I love trees. You might have to use your imagination just a hair with that one. Some of these mnemonics aren't perfect, but they do well enough to help us remember. Okay, next here we have the blue-headed vireo. This is a very early spring migrant. Again, they tend to start showing up in decent numbers in February and March. Vireos are they're an interesting family of birds. They're kind of weird. They sort of resemble warblers, but they're a little bigger. And this picture doesn't show it well, but they have a slightly hooked tip on their bill. They're actually related to shrikes, so they're a pretty cool group of birds. The blue-headed vireo, I think, is relatively well named. It's got this like sulfury flank and this white underside, but it does have that really nice sort of bluish gray head and then these white spectacles that kind of go around its eye. The song is a very squeaky, repetitive, here I am. Where are you? I'm here. What about you? Okay, and I believe this may be the last one for this month's Wings of Kentucky, the tree swallow. So we have a variety of different species of swallow here in Kentucky. The tree swallow it tends to be the first one that we see, at least in decent numbers. Very easy to ID. They spend most of their time on the wing, but I figured I'd show you perched birds here. It's better to, I guess, get a good gauge on what we're looking at. They're this very nice, like kind of iridescent blue on top with these very long primary flight feathers because they spend so much time flying, with a white throat and white underparts. Now, this is what most tree swallows you see will look like. You will occasionally see birds that look like this. Notice the bright white throat, clean white breast, and white underparts. And this one's got a hint of blue to it. Some may not. My understanding is that when you see birds like this, these are first year or technically second year, but you know, young of the year, recent females, birds that are nesting for the first time, and they're always female. So in the bird world, we call it a second year female. So those are birds that they were hatched last year. So this would be a bird in her first breeding season, but most females, after they've been around for a year or two, look pretty much like an adult male does. They produce a wide variety of calls, usually liquidy chirps and a variety of noises that are usually kind of a liquidy, watery quality. Okay, with that, I'd like to say thank you for tuning in to this month's Wings of Kentucky. We'll be looking forward to next month where we discuss what is a bird. Thank you very much and see you then.